Hi, Scarlett. Welcome to Creative Inspired Happy. I'm so happy to have you.
Same. Thank you for having me.
It's really great to see you again. I mean, it's been a while since Paris, but how are you doing?
Oh, I'm great. I was just trying to remember how long ago Paris actually was because it
I know
doesn't feel like
you
it's
you
been that
travel
long.
so much.
Yeah, we were just talking about that.
Yes, definitely. Okay, so you are a huge success. You've sold millions of copies of your book worldwide. I saw you in Paris where people were freaking out that you were there, and it's just incredible. But we talked a little bit while we were there in the author green room about kind of how you started. So, would you take us back to the very beginning? You were a librarian, you wanted to write. How did you begin?
Yeah. Actually, I started writing when I was 13 and I I read The Lord of the Rings and I had been a voracious reader like I think so many of us and but I had read mysteries. And it never occurred to me that could sort of like create my own worlds. I just
Mhm.
always thought you had to write in like the real world. And I was like, oh, what is this? Like, I want to do this too. And so I decided like from that moment on, I wanted to be a world famous author.
Oh, I love
And
it.
so I know, right? I when I was a senior, I in everyone's yearbook, I wrote remember me when I'm famous, which is so embarrassing now, but it is kind of relevant because in certain circles I'm considered famous, right? Which is such a very strange thing to say out loud, and it's also relative, but. So every decision I sort of made was centered around like wanting to be an author, a full-time author. So like when I went to college, my bachelor's degree was in English writing. I didn't do the creative route because that was through
Mhm.
the College of Journalism, and I was like, I'm not touching that with a 10-foot pole. So like, I did English writing instead. But I think that like heavily influenced like what I would go on to later write. And then I got my master's degree in library science and information studies, and while I was getting my master's, I wrote and published two books, self-published two books, and they failed miserably. And and I just kind of like got to a point where I was like not proud of them, and I was like, what can I do to improve on
Mhm.
writing? So I took several years there. I think it was from 2015 to 2018 to just like improve on my writing, like go to conferences, like we created critique groups like at my local library, and just really get feedback on my writing and improve. And then I decided I was ready again to take the publishing route, and I published my YA When Stars Come Out in 2018, and it didn't do very good at all. Like I didn't do well at all. Like I think it sold like it had like 8 pre-orders, right? And then I had a choice to write like the sequel or to write A Touch of Darkness, and I
Mhm.
chose A Touch of Darkness, and I just had a really good feeling about it. And once that book was out in 2018, it kind of just spiraled from there. So that's a very short summary of how I got here.
But I really love that you were ambitious from the start. And I think that especially a lot of women, they don't own up to that ambition. We are conditioned to say, oh, I mean, if we get lucky, or like, I kind of hope, but maybe, it'll be nothing, or it's just this thing on the side. And I love that you came at it from the very beginning, like with this intention. And actually, I'm
Yeah.
curious for someone who was so already like focused on, I'm going to be very successful as an author. How did you deal with those initial failures when your first two didn't do well, and then when your next YA, the pre-orders weren't as what you expected? How did you power through that? And I feel like it's a failure in one way, but also it's just part of your journey. But it's hard to see that when you're at the beginning of the journey. You don't realize yet this is just the beginning. These are just the stepping stones.
Yeah, it was it was so funny because I do remember at times like choosing to quit, and I'll never forget. This was prior to publishing. I was still in my bachelor's program,
Mm-hmm.
and I had gotten feedback from a critique partner because even then I was doing the whole blogger thing. I don't know if you remember the era of like
Yes.
Gmail and like Blogger, but I was there, and basically she just like tore my whole book apart, and I was just like, I'm not good at this. Like I piled everything I'd ever written on it, like, into a stack on the floor and was like ready to give up. And then the next day I was like, you can't give up. You have to stick with this. And that was around the time that I read The Anatomy of Story by John Truby. And I feel like there are two camps of us. There are like those of us who read that and those of us who read Save the Cat.
Yes, and I'm in the other one. I'm
Are
Save
you?
the Cat. I tried to read Anatomy, and it was so academic, and I think it works so well for certain brains.
Yeah, and I tried to read Save the Cat, and I could not do it at all. So it's so funny that you say that. But yeah, so I just read it and I reworked the entire story, and that was the book I would later publish in 2014. Yes, 2014. All my dates in my head. But to me, it was almost like it just felt so ingrained in my soul to do this, and I had never let anyone else influence whether or not I was going to do it. So like, my uncle once said, like, there's no money in writing, right? And I was like, well, that might be true from your perspective, but it won't be true from my perspective. And I sort of kept that attitude. I still do, like, even as, I was a successful writer, in the indie space and still getting rejection. People would tell me certain things about the industry. And I always had this like mindset of like, your truth doesn't have to be my truth. And you have to keep that in your mind when you're working toward this goal, because it is something that feels elusive at times. You're also working in a subjective industry.
Yes.
Where like some people will think you're amazing and some people will think you're so terrible. But I got a degree in English. Like that was my whole English degree. Like, half my professors were like, "Oh, you're a great writer." And half of them were like, "You need improvement." Like, well, which one is it, right?
Right.
So you just have to, like, if that's your goal, keep looking toward the horizon, I think, because that's what I did. Even when I was in those very like low moments, I let myself have them. But the next day I was back at work.
Yeah, one of the things I love, which you kind of touched upon, is in the past you have said that no doesn't necessarily mean no. It means yes, but a different way. And I would love if you talked a little bit about that, because you and I have come up through publishing through totally different paths. I've come the traditional publishing route, which is, for those people who don't know, it's kind of the big five publishers in New York when you think about an old school building with publishers, the Simon and Schusters and Penguin Random Houses. And you came up through self-publishing first, and then now you're with Bloom. I would love to hear how you made that decision to go self-publishing, and then sort of the obstacles, like the agents and the editors who've told you along the way, no, but then you did it your way.
Yeah, I always say this, like, find a way to yes. And it actually comes from my library background where, like, we're very customer service oriented. So one of our mantras was find a way to yes. And I was like, I can apply that to my situation all the time, because it is, again, that space where people will tell you their experiences and try to like project that on you. But I think the first way is just deciding that, when I went to publish When Stars Come Out and A Touch of Darkness, I realized that like the traditional process was stealing my happiness. And I loved this so much. I didn't want to feel negativity around something that had become a great escape for me. So I was like, I'm going to do it myself. And I love the creation process. And when you do the traditional route, you don't always have control over that. Like, you may not have control over your covers, or just a lot of elements that I really wanted to have a say in. So I started that process. My husband helped a lot. He learned how to format books for me. And then when it started to get popular, I realized that I may need some help, right? And I was like, okay, so maybe this is the time for an agent or a publisher. And I started to look at agents, because, again, which I had done in the past, but, hadn't really got a lot of traction there. And I just, as an aside, you kind of get tired of like waiting for someone to approve of you. And you have to step back and realize that, like, just because someone doesn't approve of you doesn't mean you're not a good author. And I sort of had that realization. So I was like, I can do this myself. So again, I was like, well, maybe now I need the agent. And I started to query people with all of the data I had on how well I was selling. And I was an author at the time my paperbacks were outselling my ebooks. And I was someone who had like between 100 and 200 ebook sales a day. So imagine how many paperback books I was selling. But even with those statistics, agents would tell me, I had one agent say, well, even if you were to go in the traditional space, I'm not sure what I can help you with because it's unusual to make more than 10K per month in the traditional space. And I was like, okay, I recognize like that's your reality, but it's not going to be mine. And I moved on. I had another agent tell me that the genre I wrote doesn't do well in traditional publishing because adults who like fantasy won't understand the romance and adults who like romance won't understand the fantasy. And I was like, this is a lie. That's a blatant lie. That's just an excuse for you to not take on my work. And I was like, okay, so again, that's your reality, but it's not mine, clearly, because my book sales say otherwise. And then another agent said, well, the industry doesn't take on self-published authors anymore. And that was it. That was just, it was like, no, not interested. And then I had a publisher reach out, an editor, and she reached out to me and said, I'm very interested in publishing your catalog. I love your books. Well, she went to acquisitions and they said they ran the numbers and that I wouldn't make any more money than I was making now. And they couldn't get me into Walmart and Target. And I was like, okay, well, again, right? Listen to all those notes. And I was just like, well, I'm just going to wait because the right thing will come along. The right opportunity will come along. And then Bloom emailed me, my editor, Krista. And when she did, I said, a lot of people have reached out to me to say they wanted to help me and they haven't been able to. So I'm very skeptical of your offer, but I'll hear you out. And the first thing they said was that they showed me all this opportunity for where I could be in more Barnes & Noble stores, but also said, we can get you in Walmart and Target. And when I told them I wanted to take over the world, they were like, we want that too. They didn't laugh. So it was this process of basically like not letting, like when I tell you I didn't believe anything those industry professionals said, I didn't believe anything. I just said, well, you're not for me. Like, because clearly, like, you're living in a different world than I'm living in. I'm living in one of opportunity and one of, like, goals and dreams. And you're not, I mean, you clearly, like, already set an expectation for me. So you're not right for me. And then Bloom came along and said, like, here are goals for you. And they exceeded anything anyone had told me before. And so it's just a process. It's kind of like a waiting game. But I waited for the yes. I waited, and I didn't let any of that deter me. And I think that's so important because this is an arena where you can feel down a lot because of the no's. But I was just like, meh. And that's a sad reality, I think, for people to live in where, I think, I try to kind of reflect on that. And I'm like, at the time, was this your reality? Like you hadn't sort of like been able to level up in that space. And that's unfortunate for them, but I wasn't going to let that deter me. So
yeah, I love that. I love that confidence that you had. And I mean, just as a reminder, we're going backwards in your career. You weren't like as mega successful yet as you are now, right? So people can't say, oh, well, you can only have that confidence because you were already world famous, right? Like you just had this belief in your work. And I truly love that. I think you were also ahead of your time, or at least ahead of traditional publishing.
I was.
And the self-publishing readers, they knew it. They knew what they wanted. And it sounds like Bloom, it came into existence right around that time. I think you were one of their first authors. And
I was their second.
So, okay. Yeah. And so it was like they saw the market and they understood the market. And then they signed you, and that's been great. I'd love to hear more about how that's changed your career. But I just want to know also that traditional publishing and the rest of the world are now catching up. There was just an article in the Wall Street Journal, of all places, staid traditional media about romantasy last week. And it mentioned you in there. I don't know if you know that. Yeah.
No, I remember interviewing for this.
And it's just so funny to me because I am thinking, like once the Wall Street Journal catches on to a literary trend, like it's been happening for years, right? I mean, I respect to their reporters, they're just not the target audience.
No, but I said this too once as in the interview. I was like, it's interesting because they presented it as something new. But we've been here for a long time.
Yes. And I mean, the romantasy market last year completely trumped sales of some of the most quote unquote famous authors like Stephen King, I think Michael Crichton, James Patterson. They lumped them all together and it was something like all together they had sold 6 million books. But romantasy as a genre went like over 20 million books, and you're a part of that. You're one
Yeah.
of the 3 names that people talk about when they talk about romantasy. So
Oh, it's
I'm
funny.
just so happy for you. I mean, it's so
I'm like
incredible.
under a rock. I'm always like, am I still relevant?
I think that's good though. It's probably healthy to not be tracking like your own, how many people are talking about you online, and focusing on your
Yeah.
art.
I like the blinders. I like to have blinders up. It's
Yeah,
hard
I
to
think that's
write.
great. So,
Yeah.
how has working with Bloom changed things from when you were self published? Because I know that when you're self published, you have to do everything yourself. And while it's great to have control, you have to be hustling all the time as well. Because unlike in the traditional published world where an author gets an advance, like you don't make money, you don't, unless you're selling books, right? So, like,
Mm-hmm.
you're out there. And I actually heard this number thrown out, and I don't know if this is true or not, but it said that traditional authors spend 80% of their time writing and 20% of their time on publicity and marketing. And indie authors
Oh,
spend 80% of their time on publicity and marketing and 20% writing. And part
yeah.
of that is where you come from, like financially, you have to, right? You have to hustle. But I think also, from my perspective, traditional authors like me, we can be too complacent about our publicity. You know, like I think a long time ago, the big publishers would take care of everything for you, but that's not really the case anymore. And so I think there's so much that we can learn from indie authors. But I'm so curious now that you're with Bloom and you're with a publisher, how has that changed your career coming from where you did, where you had your hand in every single aspect of the writing and the marketing?
I still try to have my hand in everything, which is such a hard thing to let go of. And even now, like, I have agents and I have a hard time figuring out how they fit in my equation. I love them, but it is hard because I'm so used, like I collaborate so closely with everyone at Bloom. Like I have my own little team. I have like I go straight to my editor for everything. Like we developmental edit as I write because I can't move through a plot without doing it. I
So
just
like you're
can't.
doing it like in real time, like so it's
Uh-huh.
not like you finish an entire thing and send it.
Yep. Never
Interesting.
done
I've
that.
never heard that.
Well, I think it's because, again, like how I started as a self-published author, like that's what I would do with my critique partner. Like if I hit a brick wall or something, I would work through it. So every plot point got worked out as I wrote the book. So basically what I turn in is the final draft, like the final thing. So I don't have like that very long editing process I don't even know what that's like as a traditional author. Like, or all those rounds of proofreading either. It's a very different process. So even with my covers, like I collaborate really closely with my cover designer and we do the cover and then it goes to source books or, so many elements. I have a weekly or a monthly meeting with my international team. I have a monthly meeting with my digital team. So I know what they're doing, what kind of ads they're working on and that kind of thing. And I get to approve all of that. So I actually haven't quite let that go yet. And I don't know. When I came on, they said, your job is to write books. And no one had really told me that before because I had just, it was all sort of part of the process. And I think that is why I struggle so much with writing, for example, and I have to write in these silos because I'm not used to spending my time just on writing. So I still do it. But I think with Bloom, like something that has been a mega thing that you don't get as an indie author is distribution. And you don't get the attention that you would as an indie at indie bookstores, for example, because there's this it's not miscommunication, misrepresentation of indie booksellers because readers think that indie authors are represented in indie bookstores because we share a name. They also think like the indie bestseller list is indie authors, but that's not the case. And so, I mean, I remember I love my indie bookstore, Best of Books, but when I was still indie, my friend Alicia worked there and she said, you really need to have Scarlett's books in store. And they said, well, that's not our audience. But they ordered 5 and I came in and I signed all 5. And by the time I got home, they were sold.
Oh, wow.
And then they ordered 5 more and the same thing happened. And so you had to prove yourself, right? It's like that process again. It's the same process in the traditional space. Like when I moved into like either space, I had to prove myself, which I still have to prove myself, right? Because I apparently have not, with, with all the success still, right? You have these moments where you still have to prove yourself. But yeah, I think in a lot of ways they've helped, especially with distribution and more attention and like heightening like the awareness. But the thing I love about Bloom is the collaborative element, that I still get to have a say, even though I probably should like back up a little bit and like, but it's hard once you've been indie because you have processes set in place. And so I have not quite been able to let that go yet.
It's probably nice though, because at least you get to like give some of the burden to them, so you can have opinions on art, but you don't have to source the art, you don't have to find the artist.
Well, so see, I'm the problem because I do, and then I'm like, oh, yes. So recently though, I'm trying to change that over, so and rely more on them. But it's just kind of, when you're used to a certain thing and you've formed relationships, you just really like to do, like, people are reliable and you have a bond and, you want to keep that going. And so I do. And then I get, in a situation where my manuscript is due in like 2 weeks and I'm not done yet. So yeah, I'm working on the balance is what I like to say. So.
Okay, talk to me about your writing process, because you mentioned writing in silos, and that is like a holdover from when you used to have to do everything, but you're still doing that. And I actually like that because I sort of do that as well. I don't know, maybe your process is different, but I will go through times where I'm doing promo or I'm working on this podcast, and then other times where I have to block out like 2 weeks and nothing comes in except it's only my writing.
Yes, I do that too. I think the other thing is that when I was a librarian, because I was a full-time librarian, and I would write from 5 to like 9 or 10 when I got home, and then on the weekends. And then if I really needed to finish a book, I would take vacation and write like 40K in like 5 or 7 days. Like, because, like you kind of force yourself to be able to do it because you have no choice, right? Mm-hmm. Like, and I think that was also the holdover, because like I can write 40K very quickly. It's just because by that time, like I've worked through like the beginning of the book. So I don't know how this is for you, but I'm always very slow when I craft the start of my books, because if I lay the foundation well, the rest of it is fast and easy to write. But if I don't, then I will mess up, and then I just hit brick walls as I like try to finish the book. So I can do that because I spend all this time on the beginning, and then kind of, I say race through the end, but it's not racing through the end. I just know how the story needs to be executed. But I essentially, like, my writing process is that I start hearing voices in my head, and it's usually snippets of conversation. And if they're really loud, I know the book has to be written quickly because they won't leave me alone. And so I write down all the snippets, and then I get to a point where I can string those snippets together into a story. And I have to write chronologically. But again, it takes me a very long time to craft the beginning. It's all the world building. It's figuring out the story execution. And then I kind of fly through the middle and the end, and then and then it's done. And I make it sound so simple, but I actually am probably like really annoying to my friends, because I'm like, I hate this book. Like, why did I ever want to be a writer? I like wallow in self-pity every time. But yeah, it's a process that works for me. I can't, I don't know if you're like this. I have to leave my space. Like, even though I'm at a desk right now that I'm fairly productive at, when I get to that space where I'm like 2 weeks of writing, I have to leave, because I will do anything other than write. I will like fix something, could be broken for 5 years, and I will decide it needs to be fixed when I have to write the book.
That's funny. I'm actually the opposite, where nothing else gets done. If I have that feeling like I have to write the book, I just have to write the book. And like laundry piles up, and there's no groceries, and I can't. I get very uncomfortable when I don't have a first draft or a zero draft. Like, okay. And I think that's maybe like part of what you're feeling, like that need to get the story out quickly, because it's just waiting. It's right there. And I'm a little bit afraid too that maybe the ideas of the story will run out, and then all of a sudden you don't have enough words to be a book, and you're like, oh great, so I wrote half a book and that's it. So that's partly me.
I have that feeling too. Like, do you ever feel like you just run out of words? Like, I'm like, there's only so many words and so many ways you can string them together. And like, what if I run out of a really beautiful way to say, like, fill in the blank? And, and so I'm constantly like fighting that fear of not having enough words, or like not having a vocabulary that can get me through time, I guess. I don't know.
Yes. Yes. And also, I think in each day, too, there will be a time where I'm flying, it's going great. And then all of a sudden, I hit a wall and there's no more words. And what's coming out is like this, like really, really thin, pathetic trickle. And I'm like, must keep going. But you just know it's time to quit for the day.
Yeah. I fight it a lot, but there's no fighting it. Your brain needs a break, essentially. And so I know exactly what you're talking about. I just finished a novella. Well, it's not a novella, apparently, at 50 some odd words, but that's every day, like around like 3 or 4, I could tell I was like losing steam.
Yeah.
I needed to sleep.
How do you decide when to write a novella versus an entire book?
Oh gosh, I don't know. I didn't think I could write a novella, by the way. I was like, I'm not like, I don't write like huge books, like 600-page books, although like Chaos and Gods came very close. But I think I can tell if the story is going to be contained or not.
Mm-hmm.
And so when I wrote like my fairy tale retellings, one's Mountains Made of Glass and the second's Apples Dipped in Gold, I was like, these can be very contained. But I also very much wanted to emulate the grim anthologies. Like I wanted it to look and feel like that. And I wanted to have the same tone and like the same like dark overtones. And so that's probably why I went that direction. And then there are some contained stories I'm writing within like my New Greece world. And they just don't have that like epicness or that like sweeping plot, right? It's a very straightforward plot, I guess. And that's kind of how I decide like what it's going to be. If I can see the layers, like I think in layers, which is why like my New Greece, like the Hades and Persephone series is chaos, because like I can see the storyline in layers. And if I can't see layers to the story, it's just like contained. So
are you outlining? Do you outline their stories before you write?
A mix of both. So like if I hit a wall, like usually I hit a brick wall at like 20 or 40K, it just depends. Then I'll outline, like for example, I outlined Gods. I even color coded a game of Gods, but A Touch of Chaos was very straightforward actually, even though it was a finale. And so I didn't outline that one at all, which actually really surprises me, because in my head, I'm like, I should have been more complicated. But basically, like 2 things happen in that book, in my opinion. So, but it just depends. It's like, it's kind of, do you outline? Do you?
I do. I used to be a total pantser. So I used to just kind of go organically by the seat of my pants. And what happened with my second book, The Crown's Fate, and then Circle of Shadows, which was book 1 of my next series, is that I wrote the whole thing. I turned it in to my editor, and then there were just massive, massive plot problems. And for both of those books, I had to throw away the entire second half of the book and then rewrite something completely new. And so at that point, she very gently suggested that maybe I should try outlining, which I was super resistant to, because I had this pride in me. Like, I am an organic writer. I don't do things cookie cutter like an outline. But what I discovered is that outline doesn't mean that you're only following a plot like that you've already predetermined and that you can't change anything. It's really like guideposts. And like, I think very often when I outline, I will end up veering, off a path I didn't intend to, but at least you sort of know where the story is going. So now I outline, and it helps me write faster, because then I'm not trying to figure out the plot, the main plot anyway, at the same time that I'm creating the beautiful words.
Yeah, so there's balance, right? And I think some people will let plotting stop them from writing. And then there's a beauty to discovery too, which is what I love. And I tend to struggle with, I call them transitions, but typically it's like when you transition into a new chapter. I always sit there and stare at the screen for like a day trying to figure out how I want to start the next chapter. And even with outlining, that doesn't help me. It doesn't help me move into the next chapter. But yeah, I think it's a balance, right? And I just, I love the discovery, but I also love the structure of outlining.
Okay, so how do you
discovery too?
How do you
Sorry.
make sure? No, no, no. This is fantastic. I am geeking out over this entire conversation. I want to know, how do you make sure that you are still creatively fulfilled? And it sounds like part of it is that you create these different worlds, you write different series, so you're not only writing like one series at a time for 8 years or something, but also I feel like, and maybe this is wrong, but once you have this huge fan base, they are voracious for more words. And I think some authors can get stuck into having to churn things out and they lose that joy. So, how do you, in the face of so much demand, continue to enjoy your work?
Well, I have had to work on this because I have gotten into a space where I was so miserable. And it was around chaos. I took a break for a month. I had to delay the book because I felt like I had lost like that spark because I was so afraid. I felt so much pressure around the book. And it wasn't like I just had never worked on something that people had been waiting for that long. But I told myself, like, this is something that you've wanted to do for your whole life. You have to find joy in it again. So I've started to like slot in what I call palette cleansers. So like Mountains Made of Glass was a total passion project. And I love, like, one of my greatest joys of writing is research. And every single one of my books has required some element of research. Like, obviously A Touch of Darkness is all Greek themed. King of Battle and Blood is like Romanian mythology. And then Mountains Made of Glass is a lot of different fairy tales, like Hans Christian Andersen, the Grimm brothers, blah, blah. But I see it as like this really fun task to sort of like critically analyze those fairy tales and then synthesize them into a story of my own. And I find so much joy in that. And there is a little bit of resistance. Like, I remember when I did KBB, which was a King of Battle and Blood, which was a palate cleanser to me. I needed a break from New Greece. People were mad. They were like, you should be working on A Game of Retribution. And I was
How
like,
dare
listen,
you?
I know. And I was like, listen, if I don't write this, you're never getting it. You're never getting a finale to the other book. So, I think I never want to feel, because this is what I hope to do my entire life. And I never want to feel like it's a burden, and I shouldn't feel like it's a burden. So I love going back to like just the things that like made me love this to begin with. And it was, a combination of learning and fangirling with my readers. You ask why I travel so much. A big part of that is meeting my readers, because I remember like being a young 13-year-old and just wanting to fangirl with people about these characters I wrote, even though like no one was like had cared about them in the moment, but now they do, and they tell me stories about how much they mean to them, and that's so important to me. And it's like, it's my fuel, it keeps me going. But that's the part that I love about writing, crafting the world, like. And I love doing it in my head, and then when I have to put the words on the page, I'm like, oh, like, can't you just fall out of my brain onto the page? Like, that would be so great. But crafting those like other worlds, it's like the funnest thing to me.
It is fun. It's funny that you love research. I hate research so much. I will
you're the second author who told me that.
Yes. I mean, so my first series was based in an actual time in Russia, but that was because my degree was in Russian literature and history. So that was fine. And then my second series, I initially wanted Circle of Shadows to be based on feudal Japan. But then I started doing research and I thought, oh gosh, this is so much work. You know what? I'm just going to make up a fantasy world where it's like, there's inspiration, but it's all.
No, that's what I do too. Like, I don't like, that's why like A Touch of Darkness is not in like ancient Greece. It's in like New Greece. Because I was like, I don't want to, like, I want to be kind of historically accurate, but I want wiggle room, That
makes sense. That makes a lot of sense. Okay. I want to talk about your travel and conventions, conferences. Because your travel schedule is just absolutely bonkers. Like, I don't know. I mean, I guess maybe this is kind of more common in the romance and romantasy space, but how often are you on the road?
Oh gosh. Well, this year I feel like I've been on the road since March, which is when A Touch of Chaos released. And I saw you in Paris. Prior to that, I had been on tour in the United States, and then I came back and did some conventions, and then I'm going to go back. I'm going to Germany at the end of August, and then I'm going to France again in like November. So yeah, lots of traveling. I don't know what the norm is, and I don't know how to say no. I'm learning. I said no to a lot of things for next year so I could write. But yeah, I don't know. It didn't occur to me that it wasn't the same, like in the YA space, like because you have one adult novel, don't you? Is that
I
right?
have, yeah, my second one is coming out now. I mean,
Yes.
technically
Oh,
Damsel was adult, but like a lot of
is
people
it
think it's
really?
YA. Yeah, it depends. It's
Oh,
YA in France where we met, but
oh,
it's adult in the US. So I think it's like it's
oh.
just that crossover. But yeah, so I'm shifting more into adult, which I know my YA readers will be disappointed about. And like never say never, right? I might go back, but for me right now, my heart is in writing for adults. But anyway, this is not about me.
I
This
get
is
that.
about you.
No, I'm very lucky because I get to do those, overseas events, and I think a lot of people, that may be not, on the table for a lot of people, but I have a lot of flexibility because I don't have children. I do have a dog, which everyone on my Instagram is very familiar with, Adelaide. I hate leaving her, which it's going to be nice to have a little bit of a break. But yeah, I love it. And when I started this back in 2018 and my platform and everything, because I started a brand new Instagram with no followers, I was like, I want to grow an audience of real dedicated readers. My goal was to be like authentic and genuine and attract the same kind of people. And so those connections I really value. So anytime I can sit down or like go and visit a place and be with my readers, I do try to do that. And it hurts my soul to say no to something. But I'm slowly also realizing that no one's going anywhere. And like it'll be okay and you can take a break, and because what they want is more stories, right? And then
Right.
that means we'll have more to talk about when I do see you again. So it is hard. But again, it's another reason that I write in those isolated like silos, because I am always traveling and it is hard for me to write on the road unless I'm in a certain place in a novel. Like if I'm toward the end, it's fine. But if I'm trying to craft a beginning, it's not fine. I need
Yeah.
more space in my brain for that.
I can totally understand that. And you talked about building this audience. I did not know you built that Instagram from scratch, which
I
is
did.
so impressive. How did you do that?
So, I don't, I can say that I actually don't know, but what I did do, I am a librarian first and foremost. So I thought, where do readers go? And I wanted to build a fandom, and I thought, where do fandoms live? And at the time they lived on Pinterest and Tumblr. And then I knew fandoms came out of Wattpad as well. So I did a little bit of like deep dive into sort of like what did well on Pinterest when it was repinned. And it was just quotes with like a black background and white text. And so I put quotes linked to my Amazon on Pinterest. And then I noticed on Tumblr, like graphics didn't do as well. But if you just like copied and pasted the quote into the text line, and that would do really well. So I did that on Tumblr and linked to Amazon. And then on Wattpad, I posted the first like several chapters of A Touch of Darkness there, so people could get a preview of what they were going to read on, if they were going to download my book. And that's kind of where I started. And for a long time on the reviews, people would say they found this book on Pinterest, which I think is so funny. But I did use a lot of my library background because, another thing is I chose, the title of my book is A Touch of Darkness, but you can't tell from that title it is about. So I chose Hades and Persephone as the series title because I knew visually then a reader would know, hey, this is a Hades and Persephone retelling. And where I got that from, this is so random, but I was a manager of the information services department. So we handled like nonfiction, adult, and stuff like that. And I would talk to my teen librarian about how we could make the Dewey Decimal System more accessible. And so we would change certain words to make them more identifiable and get rid of the library jargon. So I kind of tried to do that when I came to my book. And I think a combination of those things, maybe, I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's kind of like the story of your career, right? Like there's a goal, but then it's also just a lot of
Yeah.
improvisation, right? And
Yeah.
like you figure things out as they go, and it takes, a kind of like boldness to be able to do that, but at the same time it keeps you from being stuck, from having to say, okay, I need to have the entire roadmap before I even start, which I
Yeah.
think it's like very
It's like
admirable.
a fake it till you make it.
Yes, yes. I know that so well. I think so much of like when you start out as an author, it's a lot of smoke and mirrors. It's a lot of pretending that you've
Yes.
made it. And in the meantime, you're freaking out in the background and you're like, no one's bought this book, but I'm going to pretend every day that people bought this book.
I think there is something though to like putting that energy out, right? It's like, and people are attracted to that. And so eventually it will come true, right? That's always my belief. So
I love that. So one thing I've heard about like the romance community and authors is that they are just very available to their fans. And the flip side of that is that some romance authors have felt burnout from being too accessible through DMs or, and how do you deal with that? And like you have the Cult of Scarlett now, which is I think a huge Facebook group. It's also like a big broadcast channel on your Instagram. Is that what came out of like all of your Wattpad, Pinterest, Tumblr work?
that's so
Or like
funny. Yeah, I have Cult of Scarlet. Cult of Scarlet is a play upon Greek cults. Just so people know that I'm not trying to form an actual cult.
you're not an egomaniac.
Right? Yeah, I am. No, it's just a play on words. No, we've had that group for quite some time. The broadcast channel is new, and I just thought that would be really fun. But I kind of like. I'm really silly in the broadcast channel because I think it's fun. The Cult of Scarlet group, it was exactly that. It was this intention of connecting on a deeper level with my readers, and it's my safe space. So like when we do have anything in there that like is sort of negative, it gets taken out, or like, so there are some rules, like you can't talk negatively about other authors, like, because I was in my favorite authors groups as an author, and then people would bash my books, and I was like, okay, well now I gotta leave. So just because I don't want that in my space. I have a fishbowl that I like to keep very positive. But in some ways, like I have taken a step back because like I did take away tagging. If I don't follow you, you can't tag me. If I don't follow you, you can't DM me. And that was sort of like once my books hit international, a lot of people were tagging me in negative reviews, and I was like, that takes a toll on my mental health.
Totally.
And some authors can handle it. I cannot handle it. Like I like to keep my space very like positive for my brain so I can be creative, because if I like hit an anxiety spiral, I'm done. So yeah, I just think you have to find like your space and set your own boundaries. And so I like to go into my like, my Facebook group, or like the broadcast channel is very fun. I also have a Discord, which is where I connect with my street team, and my street team has about like 170 members. So I try to be like very available in the ways that I have chosen. I used to have a Patreon that was way too hard to keep track of, but some people have really good Patreons, so it's a good option for them. I want to move into doing more lives, but I do find that like finding time for those is a lot more challenging, and I used to do that all the time too. But there's something about interacting with people live that is just so fun. I mean, you do it on this podcast.
It's super fun. Yeah.
And so I'm kind of trying to figure out like what my schedule would look like to incorporate that more often. So I am always trying to figure out like how can I be available but still have balance. Balance
And I
is
think
key.
that's something I'm trying to figure out too with this podcast, is that, I've just been booking guests, like so excited to do this. And then it came time that I had to work on my book, and I realized I didn't have a stretch of time like I usually like to, like a few weeks to work on my book, because it's like, every other day I had a podcast episode to record, which I know people are like really confused because I don't have that many episodes published yet, but I'm recording them,
You have to start somewhere.
You have to start somewhere. And it's like, I'm doing all the work, but I can only put out one a week. So don't worry, everyone, they're coming.
One a week is the standard.
Yes. And I think it's too much otherwise. But it is that balance, like you said, of like, well, how much live time, but then that cuts into that brain space, right? That ability to focus on creating your art.
That's why like doing the tours, it's very hard because you are on. And I just remember like getting to the hotel room after certain events and just crashing because and you have no lucid thoughts, like you have no ability to like form any coherent like thought at all, and so it is very hard. And you know, I am learning balance. I think it's probably taken me longer than anyone else because I just say I say yes to everything. So I don't know.
But I think what's really great is that you allow yourself to change your mind. And so you can say, okay, this is what's available now. But then when you realize you need something else, you can pull back. And I think that's really like you're a great role model in that way, you know, because nothing is set in stone. You have to take care of yourself.
Kind of you. No, I have. And I have had to say no to a couple things recently that I said yes to in a time where I was like, oh yeah, I can do that. And then, you know, it just didn't work out, but people understand. And I think even and my readers too. And I think that was one of the things is like, there is such a fear around disappointing them. And while they will be sad, they want you healthy. And that's a nice sentiment. And I always think about that when I have to move a publishing date or something, which I've had to do several times. And I don't want to become known for, but whatever.
No, I think that's great. I like this like mutual respect that's going both ways. So this seems like a good seg. We're going to do a quick lightning round. And so I'm going to ask you some really quick questions. You get like one sentence or so, or one word, whatever you want to answer them. And at the end, you get to ask me a question. So it's not only on you. Okay. Who is your favorite person to travel with?
Oh, if I can, my dog, Adelaide. But if I can't have her, I'll take my husband.
All right, he's fine. Fine. What is your favorite place that you have written? Like physically you have been somewhere and then you've been writing that felt, I don't know, inspirational or just perfect.
This is hard for me because I usually am most productive in Chicago. So my default answer is just going to be like somewhere in Chicago. I finished so many books there.
I mean, maybe it's like your magic place.
It's because my editor is there and we have to body double because I won't work otherwise. I have to have someone watching me and holding me accountable. It's ridiculous.
I love it. Hey, you know, whatever works. Okay, what's the best advice you've ever received? That doesn't have to be about your career. It could just be in general.
Oh, don't make assumptions. Don't assume.
Oh, I love that. I love that. Okay, and last question. What are you reading or watching right now that you're loving?
Oh, I'm not reading anything or watching anything.
Do you do that because you're writing and so like you can't have input?
Yeah, I would say the book I'm reading right now, I think it's called The Book of Lilith, because the book I'm working on is a sort of a Lilith retelling. Mm-hmm. But I'm really enjoying it, and I love like the concept that there's a little bit of Lilith in all of us. So
I love that.
That is what I'm working on.
And I'm actually the same. I'm not reading anything right now because I have been working on my next book. And so I read something right before I got my revisions, and it was kind of the perfect tone for me to go into my work. And then in the evening, the next day I was wandering around. I usually read in the evenings. And I said to my husband and my daughter, I can't read anything now for like 2 weeks until I finish my own work. What am I going to do?
I was just going to ask you that was going to be my question, is like, what are you working on right now?
Yeah, I'm working on my next adult novel for 2025. But I'm also starting to get into promo mode for 1 Year Ago in Spain because it comes out at the end of this month on July 30th. So yeah, it's like a balance, you know, and then working on this podcast and building this community, Creative Inspired Happy. It's like I'm trying to build it to be a resource for writers. Like it's my way of giving back after I've had such like a really lovely career. So yeah, it's fun.
I told you, I've followed your career for a really long time because you debuted at the same time as my friend Kim, and I was like obsessed with your website. It was it's probably weird, but I was like, look at how pretty it is. I want one.
I was so proud of that website, and I think I was one of, if not the first person in YA fantasy to be doing character reveals, and
you were
I felt very innovative.
Saying that. Yeah, I was saying that. I was like, you were the first time I really saw character art, and I thought it was beautiful. It was brilliant. I loved it. So yeah, I totally credit you with that.
I'm a trendsetter, you know, thank you.
I love that.
Okay, your turn. You get to ask me a question.
Okay, well, tell me about 1 Year Ago in Spain. Is this based on like your experiences, or is any of it influenced of things that you've experienced? Have you been to Spain?
Yeah. Okay. So I went to Spain a couple years ago on vacation. So that was part of the inspiration. I've been studying Spanish for 3 years now, so that was another part. But mostly it's a story about a woman who she's not sure about a relationship that she's in. And he's this like gorgeous, sexy Spanish artist, Matias. And he goes to Spain without her, and then there's an accident, so he's in a coma. But then when she gets there to be by his side, his soul is wandering, and she's the only one that can see his soul. And so she has to make the soul fall in love with her again because he doesn't remember her. His soul is like a year ago, so he has no memory of her. And if she can make him fall in love with her, then his soul will reunite with the body, and then they can have their actual happily ever after.
I love this. Yeah. I have chills. What, you would never know like that element of the book by the cover. Like, yes. That is so cool.
I mean, covers are just a whole nother conversation we can have. It's like, it's so interesting what goes into covers, the psychology of them, the sales and the marketing strategies, and then how they can convey the right or the wrong message.
Yeah.
But yeah.
I've had I've learned some lessons via my own cover choices. So that sounds so awesome. I'm so excited to read it.
Thank you. I'm going to send you a copy.
Cool. Oh, yes.
Okay, so tell listeners and viewers about your latest book or what you're working on, whatever you want them to know.
Apples Dipped in Gold is my latest, not novella. I thought it was a novella. And I can't really tell. I'm like, what fairy tale is it based on? It's a lot of fairy tales, but the idea started with the Grimm fairy tale, The Hand with the Knife. And so it basically, this woman is given a knife by an elf that she can cut peat with easily. And her brothers are like, you're doing your chores too fast. What's happening? And they find out that the elf is giving her this knife. And so they cut off his hand. And I was like, that's interesting. What happens next? And so Apples Dipped in Gold is my idea of what happens next. It comes out in ebook, I think, on the 16th. I could be really wrong. If that's not a Tuesday, it's wrong. And then, you can find me on Instagram at author Scarlett St. Clair. I hang out there the most. So I
love your Instagram. I'm obsessed with your Instagram. And I have to admit that when I started my broadcast channel, I went and I stalked yours at first. Like, what am I supposed to do on this thing? Okay. I still haven't figured out what my broadcast channel is, but it's there.
I didn't do a lot for a while, and then I was like, you know what? I'm just going to be my silly, ridiculous self in there. And so recently the things I have shared, I have just like chuckled at because I'm being absolutely ridiculous. But I think it's a cool way to show people like just who you are as a person, because sometimes what we have to put out is very cultivated, you know, especially if we're pitching a book or whatever. But that's a good space to just be silly, like, you know, so.
I love it. Well, I'm looking forward to stalking you some more there. And I hope that we end up in the same place again at some point.
Me too. That was so cool.
Kind of sad that in your list of places you're going internationally this year, you won't be in Denmark, because I will be in Denmark in September at the Fantasy Festival. But we'll find
one day.
Yeah, we'll be somewhere again. I mean, just based on like how our careers like kind of crossed before we even knew each other too. Like the fact that we know multiple people, you know, in Oklahoma, and like Best of Books is your indie. I've been there on tour. I love them. They're amazing. So
yeah, I love them. I know it will happen again. So it's looking good for us.
I agree. Well, thank you so much for being on Creative Inspired Happy. I think that you've really been inspirational to everyone who's watching and listening.
Oh, thank you.